Hi there. My question as a dad is, how do I get my 3-year-old daughter to sleep when all she wants is her mum to lie with her and pat her to sleep? Is there anything as a dad I can do to start helping to do my fair share?
Oh, thanks, Ash, for your question. It's Marianne here. And honestly, this is a question that I am asked a lot. So Ash's question was about his 3-year-old daughter who is in a bedtime kind of ritual at the moment with needing to be patted off to sleep by her mum. And usually these sort of bedtime processes are very, very drawn out. And often it can leave the dads or the partners feeling like they can't actually be a part of that process because obviously the thought is that, well, it needs to be mum that's putting her to bed because she won't, go to bed, go off to sleep if I'm there. And so that can be feel quite limiting for a lot of families. So I wanted to just talk through some tips and strategies around that. So I guess the first thing to understand is that at some point that cycle, that ritual started, that bedtime process where the process of your partner, your wife having to lie with your daughter, pat her off to sleep, whether that started recently or a long time ago, the point is that it's become a very entrenched kind of bedtime process. And as I said, it can feel very limiting because it can feel like there's no other way around that. That's just what you have to do. But it is important to note that that process did actually start at some point. And so what we need to think of this is a cycle, and it's a cycle that can absolutely be broken, a cycle that can be changed. And the way that we do that is that we change the processes, we change the cycle. But my first piece of advice would actually be, given that your little girl is very used to having her mum lying with her and patting her off to sleep, we want to kind of bring that back to a stage where that whole bedtime process is really shortened and really condensed, so that it gets to the stage where your wife, your partner is going in, putting her down to sleep and then coming out of the room at that point. So because ultimately it is important for the dads, for the partners to be able to be involved in the bedtime process, whether together with their wife or partner, or whether it's, perhaps on a night when your wife or partner has gone out or is not available to do the bedtime process. So we want the dads, the partners, to feel confident that they can actually go through that process as well. So what I would advise is, and it's important to know that this is a process that will probably take, a good couple of weeks. Okay, it's not something that's just going to be changed overnight, but what it would involve is that your wife, your partner, starting to do a little bit less and less with that intervention, with that bedtime process. And the other thing actually is to make sure that the bedtime that is currently in place for your little girl, for your 3-year-old girl, is not too late. Okay, this can be a really common thing for parents where they're using a certain bedtime that they've been using for a long period of time, but that bedtime is actually quite late. And what it means is that the toddler is getting very overtired, overstimulated, and that can make that going to sleep process a lot more difficult anyway. So we really want to make sure that we set up the foundations right around the sleep process, and I would be doing this before you go through this process of sort of changing this cycle. And so a couple of really important foundations around the bedtime process is having the appropriate bedtime for your 3-year-old. Now, bedtimes of like 8:30, 9:30 p.m., these sort of bedtimes are too late. So we really want to bring that back to be around about a 6:30 to 7 o'clock bedtime, okay, for your 3-year-old. So because that's going to make this whole process a lot easier, because we want to make sure that your little girl is not in an overtired, overstimulated state at that point of going to sleep. So this is where I sort of direct families to really look at those foundations around the going to sleep process. The other thing is we want to make sure that the sleep environment is right. That's another really, really important foundation. So we want to make sure that her bedroom is set up, whether she's in a cot, she might still be in a cot, I'm not sure, or whether she's in a bed. We want to make sure that room for a nighttime sleep environment for that bedtime process is a nice, dark, cozy room, right? We don't want lots of stimulation in there, lights on, music, noise, these sorts of things. So we really want to just create a really peaceful, dark environment for nighttime. And that, coupled with the appropriate bedtime, is going to go a long way to helping this process. Okay, so getting those foundations in place first. And then, as I said, what you've got to work with then is a situation where your wife, your partner, is starting a process of starting to do a little bit less and less of the padding, the lying with. Now, ultimately, what this will lead to is that when your little girl is going to bed, her mum is just putting her off to sleep, giving her a kiss goodnight, and pretty much coming out of the room, within a couple of minutes. Okay. But to get to that stage, it is the best way to do it is a gradual process of doing a little bit less. So that might mean that the padding process is a little bit less from one night to the next. The lying down, starting to sort of just sit next to her on the bed and patting her off to sleep without actually the lying down process happening. So then maybe it's not doing that lying down, but her mum is in there just patting her off to sleep. And maybe it's doing that for a couple of nights. And then after a couple of nights, she would start to just sit there and do a little bit less patting, but still be sitting there. And then getting to a stage where she's not actually patting her at all, but just sitting there. And again, I would make sure the room is really kind of low stimulation, low level, not lots of kind of, as I said, bright lights and noise going on. That's really important. And then after a few nights, perhaps she's just sitting on a chair a little bit further away from the bed. So it's just about that gradual reducing of the intervention, and then getting to the stage where she's able to come out of the room, within 5-10 minutes, right? And then a few nights later, coming out of the room within 5 minutes. So everything is kind of leading to that point of eventually that whole cycle being replaced with a cycle, which is that simply that she is going off to sleep really easily, and her mum is just in there for a few minutes and then coming out at bedtime. So I would be going through that process probably before your point of regular involvement in the bedtime process. So that might be something that takes maybe, as I said, a couple of weeks. And then what I would do, that's kind of like the stage 2, if you like, would be you as the dad starting to take over that process as well, and starting to put your little girl to bed. But I would only be doing that once that intervention from mum has become less and less and less. So at that point, you can start to do it, not every night, but it would just be maybe you're both doing it over a few nights, and then maybe after 2 or 3 nights, or 3 or 4 nights, maybe it's you doing it. So what we're doing here is just that gradual sort of approach, but keeping it going in a progressing things in a forward direction, if that makes sense. Okay, so you want to just keep in mind that you're doing less and less and less. And as I said, having your involvement only once you've got to, mum's got to a stage where her presence in the room at bedtime is a lot shorter than what it is currently. Okay, so that's kind of like the stage 1 of it. And then the stage 2 is having your involvement, and then eventually you doing some of the bedtimes and doing it regularly, because ultimately you want to have a situation where either of you feel confident and comfortable to be able to put her to bed. Okay, so I hope that helps. As I said, really think about the foundational aspects, the basics around the bedtime process, and making sure first and foremost that she has the appropriate bedtime. We don't want that bedtime too late, because that's actually going to make the process really, really challenging. We want her to be going off to bed for an early bedtime of around 6:30 to 7 o'clock, and really just thinking about that lead-in process to bed as well. You really just pretty much want it as dinner, followed by bath, and then sort of going into bed soon after that. So thinking about that. And then, as I mentioned, the sleep environment is the other really important thing. So that would be the first thing to check. Second thing is the stage 1 of mum doing a little bit less and less and less each night over a couple of weeks, and then having that point where you're coming into the process as well. So really the whole process from row to go, we're probably talking, a good couple of weeks, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, and then getting to that stage where either of you are able to put her to bed, and it's a really quick, easy pleasant process for everyone. So I hope that helps, but thank you so much for your question, Ash. Okay, bye.